Good evening. I'd like to call to order the October 17th meeting of the New Canaan Board of Education. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First tonight, we'll take a look at the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Phil, second. Penny, all in favor? Thank you. Next, review and approve the minutes for the October 3rd meeting. Can I have a motion? Dan, second. Hugo, all in favor? Okay. And then, next is comments from the public. To ensure the public's right to be heard, the board has set aside time during the meeting for public comments. 2 minutes will be allotted to each speaker and a maximum of 15 minutes to each subject. Is there anyone wishing to address the board? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. We have a full agenda, so we'll get right into it. First up tonight under reports and recognition is the K-8 assessment report that will be led by our Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Correnti.
Either. Here we are.
Good evening. I promise I will not be as long as my report looks. Some of the information will be review from last year, so I promise I will try to go through those slides quickly, but I do have some new information that I would like to share with you. Certainly tonight it gives me great pleasure to introduce the District Curriculum Leadership Council, and many of them are here this evening. We have Kathy Grimes, our Reading K-4 Coordinator, Karen Scalzo, our Writing Coordinator, K-5, Sarah Bross, our ELA Coordinator, 5-8, Nicole Graham, our Math Coordinator, K-8, Melinda Meyer, our Science and Innovator Coordinator and Director of Innovation, K-8, and Susan Bliss, our Student Support Coordinator. We also have several administrators here, Jan Murphy, Trish Gracia, Matt Kasich, Steve Bedard, Dave Gussage, Julie Fiera, and Christy Carrera, and Zoe Robinson, Maura Fruin, and Chris Wallach. I think I've got everyone now. So for those of you that thought there might be a public comment, those are our leaders of our district. So we welcome them, and they are here to help us proceed with our presentation this evening. Certainly these people are content experts who stay current on best practices and design wonderful learning opportunities for our students. They lead curriculum writing, they design assessments, they design professional learning, they run data team meetings, and then they certainly assist with the coaching of our staff instructionally. The ultimate purpose of assessment is to support and enhance student learning. It is multifaceted and should be used to drive our instruction. Assessment should be both standardized and non-standardized, and tonight I'll be giving you an overview of our standardized assessments, specifically the results of the Next Generation Science Standards and the Smarter Balanced. So by federal and state law, we are required to universally assess our students yearly in English language arts and mathematics in grades 3 through 8, and once in high school. We must also assess our students in science in grades 5, 8, and then once again in high school. And as you remember from the last presentation, the high school uses the Connecticut SAT for their English and math assessment, and they use the Next Generation Science Assessment, which is given to 11th graders. So state testing is part of an accountability system, and it provides an annual snapshot of our student achievement. We are very cautious when we look at the results of our annual state testing. It's not meant to be a sole measure of our student achievement. If your curriculum is aligned to Common Core standards and our students are receiving high-quality instruction, then we would make an assumption that our students should do well on the Smarter Balanced assessment. Obviously, there are always factors that we're taking into consideration when we're looking at results. And I think it's always important to remember that we never teach to the test. We are using our curriculum, we have standards within our curriculum, we have assessments that determine whether we're meeting those standards. And we have a wide range of assessments, from district assessments to writing portfolios to observations to universal screenings, a wide variety. So as I said already, we have the 3 state assessments that we do: the Smarter Balance, the Next Generation Science, and the Connecticut SAT. We also have 2 alternative assessments. So we have the Connecticut Alternative Assessment for English Language Arts and Mathematics, and this is given to students who have severe learning disabilities, or cognitive disabilities, actually. And this is given to students in grades 3 through 8 and 11. We also have an alternative assessment for science, and that's the Connecticut Alternative Science Assessment, and that's also given to students with severe cognitive disabilities in grades 5, 8, and 11. This is our assessment calendar, and you will note on the assessment calendar we have 1 additional alternative assessment that will be given this year to our English language learners. I don't have all the details of that assessment yet. They've just announced that they'll be issuing a new assessment, so I'll be learning about that assessment as time goes on. But you can see that we have a window in which our assessments are given. We usually give our assessments after the April break. They're usually about 5 days that students are being tested. So in grades 3 through 8, they might do 2 days of the English Language Arts and 2 days of mathematics, and then they might do 1 day if they're one of the grades that need to get tested for science in grades 5, 8. The testing for our 3rd and 4th graders is about an hour long. We try not to hold them for a long period of time, knowing that it could get very tiring on their eyes looking at the computer screens for long periods of time. They are given unlimited amounts of time when they're taking the Smarter Balance and the Next Generation Science Assessment. So oftentimes if they don't finish within that 2-hour block, they are given extensions in a different setting to finish up that test. The middle school kids can sustain themselves. Sometimes we'll do a double block for the middle school kids to move the assessment along. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Next Generation Science Assessment to begin with. This is an online testing administration. It's a similar system that we use to the Smarter Balanced assessment. Probably the only difference between this assessment and the Smarter Balance is that it's not computer adaptive. But they're looking to make that computer adaptive, hopefully even as early as this spring. They receive a wide variety of items, such as simulations of science investigations. They do select response, tables, they have phenomenons, all things that you've heard about in our Next Generation Science reports to the board. So when we look at the assessment structure, we are looking at the 3 dimensions of science. We're looking at the science and engineering practices, which is asking students to answer questions and analyze data. We're looking at the cross-cutting concepts, which is those patterns and the cause and effect. And then we're certainly looking at the 3 areas of discipline, which is life science, physical science, and earth space science. So I decided to share this chart with you because certainly as we look at the impact in science during COVID, science was a subject area that was impacted dramatically. So when you look at, in particularly, the grade 8, so we're going to backtrack to the grade 8 students when they were in 6th grade. So in 2020, they went out and they had 4 months of remote. During that 4 months of remote, there were 2 units of study that were taught, but probably they were done through a virtual experience. And certainly the kids really missed out on those lab experiences. And those 2 units of study are really critical. They were the ecosystems and the earth science. You fast forward to 7th grade, and we had certainly a modified setting for our students. They were in a hybrid environment, and then as you recall, we had half-day Wednesdays. So we had to make some decisions with our science curriculum, and you may have recalled me talking about that last year. And some of the changes that we made were in the climate unit, and the changes that we made were because we knew that they were going to receive this information again as 9th graders. So we had to make a decision from a curriculum perspective, and so we knew that they were impacted on 2 units of study in 6th grade. We try our best to close those gaps, but in science, when you shift over to 6th grade, it's also a shift in the standards. There's a 612 standards for ELA, math, and science, so there's a change in those standards. And then certainly we got impacted once again in 7th grade. So certainly we don't teach to the tests, so that when we saw the scores for the 8th grade, they weren't surprising to us. So we took a dip in 8th grade, and certainly when you dive deeply into that data in 8th grade, the targets that we didn't perform well in were the climate, the ecosystems, and the space. So we know that they're going to be picking that up as 9th graders when they move into the geophysical. And then you may recall even Michael talking last week, when we talked about the kids who are also not in geophysical but jump to bio. And so they have an understanding of who those kids are as well and how they might have to spiral back to those standards. So this is just an example of how we don't teach to a test, that we have to make curriculum decisions. We make curriculum decisions based on that vertical alignment of what we know is best for kids. And those were decisions that we made, not trying to cram everything in, but to try to develop the concepts in depth that we had time to do so. But as you can see, our 5th graders remained very strong. And I think part of the 5th grade is that we're so fortunate because they sit in the middle school. And so our 5th graders actually get science every single day, which is very unique. When other districts don't have science in the middle school, they get it, every, 2 times a week or sometimes 3 times a week. And here is the next generation standards by level. The blue talks about the students who exceeded the achievement level. The green talks about the students who met the achievement level. The yellow is the approaching, and the reddish brown is the not met. So we always go out, we always take a look at how our students performed against the DIRG. Our 5th graders are at the top of the DIRG and the top of the state and continue to have strong performance. Our 8th graders are 3rd in the DIRG and 7th in the state. So once again, we're continuing to monitor them as they move into 9th grade. What's interesting too is our current 8th graders have never taken the next generation science assessment, because when they were in 5th grade, we were in COVID, so we were out. So this will be their first experience taking the next generation science standard assessment in the spring. I'm now going to talk a little bit about the Smarter Balanced Assessment. So the Smarter Balanced Assessment happens to be computer adaptive, and it contains a variety of items such as multiple choice and open-ended responses. And the computer adaptive nature of the Smarter Balance only stays within that grade level. They don't go out of the grade level bandwidth. So they'll just try to take it to the highest level of 7th grade and the lowest level of 7th grade, but they must stay within that grade level band. In addition to the computer adaptive portion of the Smarter Balance, the math has a performance task, and the performance task is designed to provide students with an opportunity to demonstrate their ability to apply their knowledge and higher order thinking skills to explore and analyze a complex real-world scenario. So oftentimes when the kids are given the performance task, it will take an entire block of time for them to complete that performance task. As we move into the areas of knowledge that are measured in the English language arts, there's 4 areas of knowledge and skills. They are the reading, the writing, the listening, and the research. So we look for students who will be able to show they can read and understand a variety of complex grade level appropriate informational and literary texts. They use evidence to support their ideas and written responses. They must produce effective writing for a range of purposes. They interpret and use information delivered orally to determine main ideas, summarize, and analyze. And then they research a topic and use those findings to take a position in an argument piece of writing. And this is just an example of the Smarter Balanced assessment, just one item. And really, it's about the student being able to read the passage and then go back and determine what the word means in context. And then they must use evidence to support how they know what that word means. In mathematics, there are also 4 areas of knowledge and skill. There's the concepts and procedures, the problem solving, the modeling and data analysis, and the communicating reasoning. So students will explain and use mathematics to solve problems. They must complete problems quickly and accurately. They need to understand how math concepts link together. They apply their mathematical knowledge to solve real-world problems, and then they must communicate their mathematic reasoning. And here's just an example of a Smarter Balanced question in grade 5. And in this example, the students must apply what they know about fractions to solve the problem. And there's really no guesswork. They really must take their time to solve and to fill in how that problem would be solved for each of those responses. So when we talk about the scoring of the Smarter Balanced, it's done in 4 levels. So you have 4 being the highest, and the 1 being the students who did not meet the achievement standard. So we're always looking to see if students are at a level 3 or a level 4. The students also receive an overall vertical score in each subject area, and the vertical scores are reported in the thousands. And they're really used to track growth over time from year to year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of those vertical scores toward the end of the presentation. And then students do receive feedback on how they're performing in each area in ELA and mathematics. So they get some input on those. And then this is just a sample report that parents receive. And it gives the summary of what the Smarter Balanced is. It talks about the achievement levels. It talks about their vertical scaled score. And if it's the 2nd or 3rd year, it will talk about the growth that they're making on that vertical scaled score. So when we're looking at the results of the Smarter Balanced assessment, we always start with that big picture. We start with our ELA results, our English Language Arts. And so right now we had 84.1% of our 3rd through 8th graders who met or exceeded the achievement level of level 3 or 4. We then dive deeply into the grade levels. And this is very complicated to compare year over year because they're not a matched cohort. And so this is just how they performed last year as a group of 5th graders or a group of 6th graders. Sometimes you can look at it diagonally, but once again, you need to remember that kids move in and out of the district, so it's not a matched cohort. Certainly in 6th grade, that's a year that we're always looking closely at. That tends to be a year where we take a dip, and that's because the shift in those standards, they move from the K-5 standards to the 612 standards. We also look at the results by level. The blue represents the level 4. The green represents the level 3, yellow represents level 2, and the brownish red represents the level 1. Certainly when we're looking at the data, we dive into the data by school, by class, and then by individuals. We triangulate data, and we have conversations about student growth or lack of student growth. This year, we really took a look at the gender differences between our boys and girls. In previous years, I've reported that we haven't had statistically significant differences between the females and the males. And this year, you'll notice there are 2 grade levels that do jump out at you, the 6th grade and the 8th grade. And certainly when we dove a little bit more deeply into that 6th grade, we do have a high percentage of students who are considered high needs. When the state identifies high needs, they're identified by students who are receiving special education support, students who are receiving English language learners, students who are identified as homeless, and students who are receiving free and reduced lunch. And so it is a group of students that do have a high percentage of students in that category. Then we took more deeply a look at the girls and the boys, and it tends to be a high percentage of boys who are also within that high needs. That doesn't mean that we don't continue to analyze the data and look at it individually, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and how we do that, because we want to always know where each student is performing and how we can help each student to grow. And then this is we do like to compare our data to like communities. So this is the comparison of New Canaan to the DERG. And certainly we continue to perform well. We're at the top of the DERG and the top of the state for our students overall in grades 3 through 8. We also like to take a look at it by grade level. And we'll see some fluctuation in the grade levels and where the students performed by DERG. And then certainly taking a close look at that 6th grade, which historically has taken a dip, and it tends to take a dip for most districts. But this year it took a little bit more of a dip than we would have liked. This is just a comparison of math. We follow a similar process in mathematics, where 82% of our 3rd through 8th graders met or exceeded the achievement level. We dive into the data by grade level, and we have a close conversation at the building level about each of the grade levels, and then we even dive into individual classes, and then we dive into individual students. Once again, we look at the results by level, blue being exceeding, green being met, yellow being approaching, and that reddish-brown color being not met. And what's nice about this when you're on the computer is you can actually hover over each of those, and you can actually see how many students it is and the names of students who are in each of those categories. We once again dove deeply into that gender differences, and the grade level that stands out is that 6th grade. And so that was something that we looked at very closely. And it is, once again, a big difference between our males and our females in that grade 6. Once again, we look at our data in comparison to the DERG. And we're at the top of the DERG overall and the top of the state for our students in grades 3 through 8. And then we dive into it by grade level. And once again, you'll see some fluctuation in that grade level data. So what's really important is really when we talk a little bit about the growth data. So, and I wanted to just spend some time diving into this to really explain. So when you look at the achievement level, it's great to give you that quick overall perspective. It allows you to see how a school's performing. It allows you to see how a grade level's performing, allows us to even see how a class is performing, and it allows us to even see how a student's performing. But what's really important is to see, are our students growing? So just because they sit at a level 3, we want to know, do they grow at that level 3? Do they grow at that level 4? Do they grow at that level 2? So each level is divided in half. So you'll see that they've taken level 1, and level 1 becomes level 1 low and level 1 high. And then they reorganize those by a 1, 2, and then you'll see it going up 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. At the top is the scaled vertical score, and that's where we want students to perform within that range. That's what puts them into a particular level. And then the target is the growth. At the bottom of the box, it shows the growth that a student would have to make, and that's the 1 year's growth that we're expecting our students. And every level requires children to grow, even if you're at a level 8. And then this is the growth target for English language arts. So same exact grid, except they've done the scaled scores for English language arts and how they expect their students to perform. So when we take a look at this as part of the Next Generation Accountability Report, the state, and obviously New Canaan, wants 100% of their students to grow. And it doesn't matter if the students are at a level 1 or at a level 8. You want to be able to see growth over time. So last year, we didn't have this data because there was a lapse in the Smarter Balanced. So the students did not take the Smarter Balanced in 2020. So for some of our students, last year was considered a baseline. So we missed that growth data, the growth data, because it was hard to dive into the individual. So you looked at the scaled score, you looked at their achievement level, you made some assumptions about how the kids were doing, you triangulated the data. But this year, going back into that growth model is really helpful as we plan for our students. And so when we're looking at this, we can take into consideration student A, for example. So as a 7th grader, student A scored a vertical scale of 2552, 2052, which put them at a low level 3. So they technically met the achievement level of a level 3 as a 7th grader. They went and took the assessment as an 8th grader. Their score was a 2580. So their growth was supposed to be 40 points. So we were looking for them to move over into a high level 3. And this child stayed at a low level 3. So they remained in that category of a 5. So even though they may be considered part of the level 3s that have met or exceeded that benchmark, it's kind of concerning that the child didn't make the growth. So they get a growth flag of a 0 because they didn't make their growth and they only had a target of 70%. So what we do is we create giant spreadsheets. We look at these spreadsheets and we dive into it individually. And we go through each student and have conversations about students who didn't meet their growth. And it's quick and easy to do when you see those 0s and 1s going right down an Excel spreadsheet. Student B was at a level 6, so they were level 3, and they were a high level 3. They were a level 6 as a 7th grader, and then as an 8th grader, they moved to a low level 4. They grew 85 points, which is an extraordinary amount of points to grow. They have a growth flag of 1. Certainly, if you do the percentage of that, it should be about 200%, but they only give them 110%, and that's how the state records it. So if they grow over that growth, they get flagged as number 1 because they met their growth flag 1, and then it just stays at the 110%. Student C was at a level 4. So once again, it's important that they continue to grow even at a level 4. So as a 7th grader, they were at the vertical scaled score of 2694. As an 8th grader, 2704. They grew 10 points. So as you can imagine, when they get to that high level, the growth isn't as dramatic that they would need to grow. At the lower levels, you're going to see 69, 50, 48. They're going to need to grow much more in order to meet that grade level benchmark. So in this case, they got their growth flag and they achieved the 83%. You'll notice that it's not 12. They should have gotten 12 out of 12, but because they're at that level 4, they're already in the high level, you'll see that it says 12 or maintain. So they're maintaining that high level of 4. They're at the level 8, so they still got their growth flag. And then student D was at a level 3, and they were at 2617, and that was a high level 3. And then as an 8th grader, they dropped to a low level 3, putting them at a 5. They didn't grow. They got a 0, and then the 0% of the target achieved. So as you can imagine, this vertical scaled scores, when you're looking at the growth over year to year to year, it's pretty powerful and allows you to really look at the individual student and then to plan for those individual students and to help them to achieve that growth. It's also a nice model because it also helps those students who are identified with special ed. We're always looking for them to grow. It helps to identify those children who are English language learners. We're always looking for them to grow. Students who are RTI, students who are receiving as much support. And we know that some of our high need students were impacted the most during COVID. And so they were really struggling, and certainly some of these students, as you go through it and you talk with the teachers, they can give you such anecdotal notes about these individual students. They could talk about, you know, this is a student who was struggling, or this is a student who was having difficulties socially and emotionally, or this was a student who was really off. Or this is a student that didn't surprise me because throughout the course of the year, I kept working with the student. I had benchmark assessments. This child went into RTI, and they just didn't make the growth that they needed. The conversations happen with the coordinators and departments. They happen with coordinators and individual, and then certainly it ties all into TEPL when they're sitting down and having conversations with their administrators. They're always reflecting on this data. But this data is just one piece of data. We obviously need to look at data over time, which is part of what I said at the beginning, that we don't want to just look at the Smarter Balanced as the sole achievement. So we do have some other assessments. The NWEA data is a nice data because it actually does a nice comparison and predictor of where students should be performing on the Smarter Balanced assessment. So if you look at the top, those are those scaled vertical scores, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and then right below it is where the RIT score is. So NWAA talks in RIT. They use the RASH unit scale. It helps you to compare the achievement and growth over time as well. So we can track our students with RIT scores from year to year to year. We give the NWEA in both reading and mathematics. But the NWEA is also limited because it doesn't dive into open-ended responses. It's a multiple choice test. So we have to use other assessments to continually triangulate that data. So we're always using formative assessments, our unit assessments, our benchmark assessments, our midterms. And those are all identified when we go through those assessments. We're always looking at the depth of knowledge to try to analyze what kind of question are we asking, those high-level questions. Are we asking kids to analyze? Are we asking kids to just summarize or do a main idea? And so we do track all of that information as well. And then certainly, as you can see, all of this kind of ties back into previous presentations when I've talked about response to intervention. And it certainly ties back into when I've talked about the teacher evaluation and professional learning. So what do we do for next steps? I've talked a lot about how we review data by grade level, by class, and by individuals. We also have the opportunity to review data by targets, which is what I talked about when we talked about the next generation science standards. We knew that our students didn't do well in that climate, which is what brought those scores down. But it also gives us an opportunity to celebrate. So this past year, we put a lot of effort into third grade and the teaching of fractions. And our kids performed incredibly well. Every class had high results in fractions. We did a lot of professional development with fractions. We revised a lot of our units of study in regards to fractions. Fractions is really critical as you follow math all the way up into high school, and to have that deep understanding of fractions and being able to build upon it from year to year is really critical. We also identify targets that might not be as strong, and then those are areas that we focus on as a possible whole grade level. We continue to monitor our students through our benchmark and district assessments. We conduct data teams, which I've talked a lot about at RTI, to review our results. And then certainly when needed, we create response to intervention and we create individual plans for our students, whether it be through Tier 2 or Tier 3. So I'm here to answer questions.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. Questions? Brendan.
Thank you for the presentation. It's comprehensive as always. So to me, you know, through this and other presentations, we do a lot on a student by student, individual basis. And I just wanted to know whether, as Penny's asked in the past, there's anything more we can do in terms of, whether it's additional TAs or support for kids as we look to, remedy some of the challenges that they felt during COVID. And I think we all know we spent a lot less during COVID because there are a bunch of things that we didn't do. So maybe there are some things that we can do, even if on a temporary basis next year, maybe next year and the year after, to sort of jumpstart those, initiatives.
I think probably if we were going to say what would we want to spend money on, it would probably be additional reading and or math specialists. They're just very hard to find. That was what a lot of the grant money, people were putting it out and using their math and reading specialists and trying to find people who could come into the district and could coach teachers and do response to intervention, do tier 2 and tier 3 instruction. We do spend a lot of time and money on training our teachers. So all of our reading specialists are Orton Gillingham trained, and if they're newly hired, they go through Orton Gillingham trained. So they have that same level of tier 2 and tier 3 that special education teachers have as well, so that they try to get the kids at an early age. We've spent a lot of money even on the assessments that we're using at young ages, on the dibbles, to try to pick up real quickly those kids who might not be making the progress with their phonics and phonological awareness. But I think probably as we're moving and looking at SACS, which is a very large building, I think some of the things that we've been talking about and are continuing to talk about is even just the schedule at SACS. And is there a way that we can build in better time for kids to receive response to intervention? Sometimes they feel like they're missing out when they're going to get extra support because it's pulled from that workshop block of time, and sometimes there's other things that are more fun during that workshop block of time that they don't want to miss. So it's is there different ways that we can creatively schedule so that we can try to build that more naturally into their schedule. And then certainly it's always looking at the staff. We've gotten really creative, thanks to the SACS administrators, on how we instruct kids. We actually use, if it's not a reading or math specialist, we actually use our certified teachers. So we figure out ways to get our certified teachers to work with our most neediest kids on giving them that response to intervention instruction.
Julie.
How many math specialists do we have per school?
So at the elementary schools, it's a 1.0.
Okay.
South has 2 part-time people, but East has a full-time and West has a full-time. And then at SACS, there's 2 math specialists. And we increased the math specialist at SACS, it was probably about 4 years ago. There used to be just 1, and then now we've added 2 math specialists.
Are the math specialists pulling out or working with kids that need the most help, or are they pulling out kids that are more advanced and kind of challenging them more?
So the math specialists do very similar to reading specialists. They spend some of their time doing response to intervention, working with our most neediest children. And then they also do some time coaching teachers. So because we've had a lot of new hires at SACS and at our elementary schools, you can imagine where that math specialist and reading specialist time is going. So they're spending a lot of time coaching new teachers, which is what we want them to be able to do, so that the new teachers are comfortable with differentiating instruction, that they're able to follow our curriculum and be able to utilize the right resources. But certainly that's always going to pull away from something else. Maybe there's a veteran teacher that they could be coaching or working with in that classroom. And they're always available to extend students. And usually that extension is working through classroom teachers. So they have those conversations with classroom teachers and they work to help them extend those kids. We have different levels of our math curriculum, and some of our math curriculum has extensions that have already been built in, especially in particular for our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. Those extensions are built into that, so that if they move into advanced math, they're ready to go.
In elementary school, how do teachers handle the multiple levels of students in class?
So that's part of the differentiation of instruction. So they use those assessments. So the assessments is what identifies possibly the different reading levels that children are at. So they give our benchmark assessment to our students that's used 3 times a year. It gives them a level in which the student is reading. And then what they do is they call them guided groups. And so they know what they have to do in order to move a child up. So if they're at a level 14, they know exactly what they need to teach in order to get them to that next level. And so the guided group might be 4 or 5 students who are at that same level. So if you look at that workshop model that takes place, it might begin with an interactive read aloud, or it might begin with a mini lesson where all the kids are together, and then they're going off and they might be practicing that in their independent reading, and during that time, the teacher is pulling over a guided group, and they're instructing those kids within that guided group, helping them to improve in their reading. They also confer with students individually, and they set targets for those students and have conversations about the books that they're reading and what they're doing to become better readers and what they're continuing to work on. And then they also have those strategy groups. Those are the ones where we need to just work on fluency, and we need to understand how do we fluently read, and how do we stop at periods, and how do we stop at commas. So it's challenging. But that's what they're trained for. That's how they understand. So you can imagine how important those assessments are, because it's those assessments that allow them to intentionally plan for the kids within their classrooms. So in a first grade classroom, a teacher might have 3 or 4 guided groups because kids are going to be at a wide range. And that's just part of how they have to instruct the kids to move along. When you get to 4th grade, those guided groups might not be as many because the kids have become better readers. But that's a challenge in and of itself, because now you're not listening to them fluently read, you're constantly trying to figure out what's in their head and how they're comprehending and what strategies they're utilizing to comprehend.
The Smarter Balance assessments, do they mimic the SAT, or are they testing for 2 different things? Are they kind of just a lower level of the SAT? Because I'm just trying to correlate these scores to 2 weeks ago presentation. These scores look great.
So the one thing that I could tell you is that the SAT is aligned to the Common Core. And what you'll see is some similarities, like the example that I gave you in ELA would be kind of a similar kind of question that they might see on the SAT. The difference is it's going to be purely multiple choice for those students. It's not going to be open-ended responses.
Okay. Another question, I'm sorry, about SATs. And it came to me after the last presentation, but I'm pretty sure you'll have the answer.
I'm hoping, if not,
I
I'll
think you
call
will.
upon Chris.
I know not every student chose to sit and take the SAT. Did those students clock in as a 0? Did that get averaged into our number?
So they don't get a 0, but it impacts our participation rate.
Okay.
So when we do the state and federal annual testing, so as I explained that every 3rd through 8th grader must be tested in ELA, and every 5th, 8th, and 11th grader must be tested in science, we also need to have 95% of our students take the assessment.
Okay.
So it could impact your participation rates if not all of the students are taking them.
Okay.
Penny?
Thank you again for the comprehensive presentation. I was just wondering, I know when we had talked about Smarter Balance originally, we were excited by the possibility that students, when they took the test, might be able to go beyond, for the high-performing students, go beyond their grade level. And that isn't happening now. Is that something we're still pushing for? Is that something we'd like to see happen, or?
So
sort of a
it's
dead
actually
issue, or where are
regulated
we?
by the federal government. So the federal government says that they must be tested only within their grade band. So it's just part of, so the state testing that we're giving to students, it must be within their grade band. Where we test out of the grade level is the NWEA. So you could have students who are performing well on the NWEA. As a matter of fact, we experienced it a week ago when we had some of our 8th graders who were all of a sudden getting questions in geometry and getting questions in Algebra 2 because they were performing so well. And then what happens is it will say, oh, you're starting to get these geometry questions wrong, and then we're going to bring you back to algebra. And so the kids will pick up on that, especially as they get older, because the assessment, in particularly math, will get hard very, very quickly. The reading will also become very challenging for them. So the NWEA really allows us to test out of that band.
And one other quick question. I know that a few years ago, to sort of lessen the differences between genders, we changed the readings that we were doing. I mean, adding a lot more sort of just informative rather than fictional readings that seem to capture the attention of the boys more. Are we still have all those changes in place?
Yeah, we do. We do a lot of informational reading because a good majority of the Smarter Balanced is informational reading, and certainly the SAT is informational reading. So we do push our students to do more informational reading. I think that, we're just going to continue to monitor it and take a look at it individually. We do, we have some classes where there wasn't a gender gap. So we always go back to say what's going well in those classes and can we use those strategies in other classrooms.
Thank you.
Erica?
So I found your example of fractions and how, covering fractions really deeply is helpful as they go to the upper levels. And there were units of study both in the spring of 2020 that weren't covered, and then throughout 2021 that were covered, but maybe not as fully as we would have otherwise. Those topics then come back around, in later years, right? 2-3 years later. And then our teachers are both covering the material they would have normally covered, but there's kind of a gap potentially from where the kids are. How do they manage that given the pace of what they need to cover on a normal basis to move forward, and knowing that there's kids that may have picked up some of it, but there are kids who didn't? How do they manage that?
So once again, it's going to be similar to reading. It's going to be those informal assessments that you're going to be doing to try to determine what those gap areas. The positive with math is it tends to spiral. So you can be teaching something in fractions, and it's easy if you know what the standard is the grade level before, and you know what the standard is the grade level after, then it's easy to differentiate your instruction based on those standards. So part of the professional learning is really making sure that teachers have a deep understanding of not only the standards that are within their grade level, but the standards that are coming the year before and the standards that are coming afterwards. Mm-hmm. When we look at those scores for 6th, 7th, and 8th, I do think our kids took an impact. When you look at where they were during COVID, they were in 3rd and 4th grade. Think of 3rd and 4th grade. It's where they really learn how to do school. They really learn how to collaborate. They really learn some executive functioning skills. It's also where they're starting to read for meaning and do deep problem solving in mathematics. So we are going to have to continue to work to close those gaps for those kids. Regardless of whether it's through social emotional, whether it's executive functioning, or whether it's just skills that they might be missing. And so the assessments that we do, the data teams that we do, the conversations that we have about kids is just really critical. But it's hard to be a teacher right now. It's a lot of work, a lot of differentiation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And similarly for labs, which are the hands-on work that kids didn't get, is there additional lab work that they need to do to make that up, or does that just sort of fold into now being back to normal, they pick up what they lost?
So once again, the lab work that they're doing is always related to their curriculum, but you'll notice that, I will have to say, last year with our 5th graders in particular, we were spending a lot of time teaching them about the procedures of a lab. Because in 4th grade, had all individual materials, they were doing it individually, they weren't working with partners, they weren't collaborating, they weren't having those conversations because that's just what 4th grade looked like for them. So when they came into 5th grade, a lot of those skills that they may have learned, we had to reteach to 5th graders.
Yeah. And then and I know in some places we had little dips, in some places a little bit larger. Is any of that attributable to the cohort itself, where you would say, oh, this was a cohort that we saw it in 3rd grade even before COVID, that they were performing a little bit differently? Or what we're seeing, you think, really attributable to what we weren't able to do during COVID?
Well, I think in particular, like I talked about that 6th grade cohort. So we are talking about a cohort that has a high percentage of kids that are identified with high needs. And so that is a cohort that we need to spend a lot of time working with and making sure that they're getting all the support that they need, whether it be through special education, whether it be through our English language tutors, or whether it be through our RTI. So you are always going to run through that with cohorts. We're always looking to see what are the gap areas. We go back, we dive into the targets, we dive into NWEA. We're now looking at results of NWEA. We're able to compare RIT scores to where they were a year ago. Are the RIT scores lower than they were a year ago? If they are lower than a year ago, we go back and we say, what standards might they be falling apart on? And that's the NWEA is actually aligned to Common Core standards as well. So you're able to go back and say, okay, which kids might be missing certain standards, and you're able to run reports that way.
And then will there be, on some of the gender differences that you noted, will there be intermediate points now that looking at other assessments that we'll be able to continue to monitor and say, like, is this persistent, and therefore what are the things that we need to look at to potentially do differently?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I've been talking with Sarah Bross and Nicole Graham, and both of them already have action plans, and they're already got Excel spreadsheets, and they're already looking at it through data teams, and they'll be looking at unit assessments and diving more deeply into that. Also looking at the plans that kids have to make sure that they're continuing to make that progress.
Great.
Julie?
The high need students that are in 5th and 6th grade, did you find an increase in high need students in those grades post-COVID, or was that always the trend with those two grades?
I believe that was the trend, but I would need to look that up.
Okay. And then looking at NGSS by level, it looks like we exceeded, the 5th grade exceeded expectations, like 50%, 52.03. And then in 8th grade, it looks like a quarter exceeded. Is that more of the spread that you want to see? Is that kind of?
Are you looking at the colored chart
Yeah.
by level?
Yeah.
So obviously, we always want to see as much blue as possible on these sheets. Makes us happy when we see the exceeding. And once again, we look at like I said, we don't have growth models in NGSS, but in Smarter Balance we would, because once again, you'd want to see, are they moving in that level 3 range too?
The 50% in 5th grade, do you think, are those students being challenged enough there? Does the work just kind of incrementally get harder as they move on to 8th grade? It just seems like a big number difference there.
I think they're being challenged. I don't know. Once again, we would have to dive more deeply into the individuals in the 8th grade to see who was, at the met versus who was at the exceeded, and dive into why that might be.
Okay.
Actually, I had a question. I don't know if you have other questions, Julie, but on that point, with the 8th grade, because you mentioned the gap with the climate study and other areas. So as we look at this year's 8th grade cohort, who will be testing in the spring, did you have to adjust the curriculum again, looking back at 7th grade and what they have to catch up on, or is the curriculum sort of preparing them towards that test in the spring?
So we're hoping that we're back on track with our current 8th grade. So they did receive their full units of study in 6th grade. There were a few things that we had to adjust. They got their full climate unit in 7th grade. Probably one of the things that we want to work carefully with those 8th graders, because they've never taken it before, is give them some experiences and exposure to the test, because they didn't take it as 5th graders. So we'll probably do a few more interim assessments with them so that they feel more comfortable with the style of the test and how the phenomenons work.
Okay, thanks. Julie?
The math DIRG comparison, 3rd grade is like off the charts compared to everybody else. Did we do anything different that year? Do you know why?
So we've been adjusting let's see, if you go back to our budget, we had to purchase new investigation math books because the series was outdated. And so we went to the new edition of the Math Investigations book. Math Investigations that doesn't cover all the Common Core standards. You can't just go chapter to chapter, so that's where the curriculum comes in, that you have to write the curriculum and the standards and identify those resources within that math book. So we started, the third grade was the group that was getting the new investigations books and the new curriculum last year. And then this year is fourth grade, and then next year's fifth grade, and you'll see that correlation in the budget when we keep purchasing those textbooks. And I do have to say, we did a lot of professional development with our K-1-2. So that's the cohort that's been following the new textbook and the new curriculum. So they received it as kindergartners, then first graders, then second graders, and then third graders. So they keep getting it as they move along, and now they're in fourth grade getting it. So we do think that's an impact because it's more aligned to the Common Core standards.
Interesting, okay.
Dan?
Just one question on the growth targets.
Mm-hmm.
Do you track like that over a time series as well? Like are more kids actually hitting the growth targets? Are they not? Because I think that the raw data is helpful, but also like if you actually have a benchmark that you're trying to get kids to grow into, being able to understand
Right.
what we're doing as a district.
Right, so we do have that one gap year, but now we'll start hopefully picking up the growth target over time. So, and it's really fascinating because I think what happened was when you looked at our 2019 data, we were at a point where we were performing incredibly high. And then that's when the state came out with the growth targets, which allowed us to really start diving more deeply into the individual students. And so the achievement target as well is also part of the next generation accountability report. And so they do an average of that growth, and you have to continue to grow as a district each year. So that's another way that they track the growth as well, which could be a whole nother presentation in and of itself.
On that note, I'll say one more, okay.
I'm not sure what year it was, but I think we changed, and correct me if I'm wrong, changed the advanced math in elementary school, just, we made changes to it. Is that correct or incorrect?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain those changes, and have you seen any changes in test scores since that happened?
So we have not seen changes in the test scores. Our fourth graders are still performing incredibly well. We've created what we call extensions that help them to move along, and the advanced math just starts in fifth grade. And then certainly we continue to track. So when we made that change, we were always looking at the end result. So in eighth grade, we offer 3 different levels. We offer pre-algebra, algebra, and geometry. And so we never wanted to impact where kids would end Sachs Middle School. And so we still wanted to be able to offer kids the geometry. And that's truly what happens as they go through their placement. So kids will either end eighth grade in pre-algebra, algebra, or geometry. And we still have the same amount of kids that are in geometry than when we made those changes.
Okay, last question. Do you think the fifth grade teachers and the ninth grade teachers find the incoming students prepared from elementary and middle school?
I would think so. I mean, I spend a lot of time with them and having conversations with them and going to data teams. I think the data teams speak volumes for how the students enter into the middle school, and I think they're prepared for the academics, and I would say the same for ninth graders. I look at the end results of our eighth graders. I think we have some dips in our fifth, sixth, and seventh grade scores. I don't think that's atypical considering developmentally what's happening with middle school children during that time period. And then it's interesting when you watch eighth grade, those eighth grade scores always spike right back up. They're always at the top of the DERG, and I think that moves them right into ninth grade.
All right, well, special thank you to you, Dr. Krenti, and to all of the curricular leaders who have worked really hard to pull this data together for us tonight. And I'll say thank you for your patience to the Crisis Advisory Board, who is our next presentation. I'll invite our co-chairs, Christy Carrero and Steve Bedard up, along with support from your CAB team. Thank you.
That's a very tough act to follow, Dr. Krenti. Thank you very much for that. It's big shoes to fill. In all serious note, to the board, to Brian, the district cabinet, and also the Board of Education, thank you very much for inviting us here this evening to talk about school safety in New Canaan Public Schools. Having been an employee of New Canaan Public Schools for 20 years, as a teacher, coach, and now an administrator, I have a great sense of pride in terms of everything we do here in New Canaan, but specifically our school safety. When I do approach school safety as a CAB co-chair along with Christy, I do it through the lens of a parent. I have 2 children, one in middle school and one in elementary school. So when we do have these discussions and have to make these decisions, I really do look through it as if my kids went to one of these schools, would I feel safe and comfortable with what they are doing to keep our schools and our children and staff safe. So I did just want to share that because I think I speak for most of CAB in terms of how we approach our work. This evening, I hope to give you guys an overview about our systems in place to keep in our approach to school safety. And hopefully you see that, we realize and recognize that our work is never done, and we continue to work towards improving all of our safety measures in order to keep everybody safe here in New Canaan. And I can't do as Dr. Krenti justice and tell everybody who's here, but I do want to just point out we do have a number of our CAB administrators here, as well as our community members, and it's with great pride that I stand up here representing them, because I think you'll hear tonight the great work that everybody does. This evening, you'll hear directly from our Deputy Chief, DeFederico, our SRO, Officer Deek, and Shane Gibson, as well as our lead campus monitor, Bob Muller. As you know, our top priority is protecting our school communities. Our ongoing work is directly tied to Goal 4, Objective 4, which is to continue to analyze and update school security and safety plans. We focus as a district on 3 areas: our physical, emotional, and our cybersecurity. Physical, when we talk about that, we talk about our schools, our infrastructures, our systems, the training of our people. Our emotional, that's our EI work, which Dr. Susan Bliss will talk a little bit about this evening. In addition to Susan, each of our schools have what we call Ssp Teams. Those are student support personnel teams that work proactively with students and families to support them emotionally as they go through our schools. The last one is our cybersecurity. Ian McHugh is our director, and he oversees a number of different security measures that are in place. Everything from Know Before, which is a system in which we test our faculty. They go with a phishing email. You've heard a lot about that. We do have a system in place to test that. And I can tell you, as a result of doing those exercises, I think less than 10 staff members had clicked on it the last time we did it. So you see an improvement. It's fitting that we talk about improvement for our students, but we also see improvement in our staff in terms of how they respond to some of these exercises. In addition to that, we even have updated security measures for our emails in terms of 2-form identification that we have in place in terms of our cyber security measures. As we introduce ourselves, we refer to CAB, and that is our Crisis Advisory Board. The Crisis Advisory Board is a combination of school administration, district leadership, and also town and emergency services. This board was founded in 1999, and we have approximately 24 members. We meet monthly, and the purpose is to continue to evaluate our systems and to align our practices with those best practices that we learn from evaluating any local or national emergencies. And one of our members that I am going to call up to say a few things about the work in CAB, but also the community's partnership in keeping our schools safe. That's our Deputy Chief, John DeFederico.
Thank you, Steve. I'll be brief. I just wanted to say a few words about CAB. I've been on CAB probably 7 or 8 years, and shortly after Sandy Hook, I became involved in CAB in my position as a Deputy Chief. And as you can imagine, at that time, there was a lot of fear and uncertainty and a lot of anxiety and just not knowing how to proceed in this new era that we were in of providing security and safety to our children in a level that we've never had to experience before. And through the years, CAB has grown, and I've commented to Steve and Dr. Lutzy that I've noticed, particularly this year, that, sitting through these security assessments and CAB meetings that we've had so far this year, that these folks here have all grown and developed, and there's no longer that sense of anxiety. It's been replaced with a sense of confidence, and that's a credit to CAB and your faculty and staff here that are here tonight. They've just done a phenomenal job. We'll never reach that goal of having 100% safe and secure, because we're not going to operate in prisons. That would, it's just not attainable. We need to create a learning environment as safe as possible. And there's many things that we still need to do, but we're growing and going in the right direction, and that's a credit to CAB, from Joanne's days in CAB and running CAB, to Steve and Christy, how they've taken it over, and all of the administrators that are sitting here tonight. So I applaud you all for supporting them in the way that you have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. So the work of CAB this year, we talked a lot about in Jill's presentation, the impact of COVID. The safety of our students during the last couple of years was definitely at the forefront in terms of keeping them in school and practicing our drills that aligned with safety mitigation strategies. So previously, in the last couple of years, our drills did look very differently, much smaller scale. Now that we are back without those mitigation strategies, we're continuing to proactively and identify protocols, practices, and systems that can be strengthened. Our whole drills are now back. So those things are taking place in our schools, very similar to when we were pre-COVID. The work of CAB also reviews and updates all of our hazard plans. And again, those are aligning with best practices. We updated our crisis management plan for administrators and presented it to administration over the summertime during our admin retreat. Each and every CAB meeting, if there is a local or national or even international for that matter crisis, we do take a deep dive and see how that's applicable to us and evaluate the situation based on our own procedures and systems in place. We continually work with town personnel to make sure that we have that continuity and open communication about things that happen not only in our community but in our schools. And we do want to make sure as a committee that we work together not only for ourselves but to train all of our staff and students through various programs that are either available or programs that we can run with our staff. For example, our staff meetings, we oftentimes spend a little bit of time doing a tabletop, putting together a scenario that staff works together. And we also conduct vulnerability assessments, which we'll probably get to a little bit later in terms of what we know about what's in place and how can we strengthen it. And through that, we really want to have those difficult conversations to make sure we can continue to improve as a group. So at this time, I'm just going to introduce my co-chair, Christy Carrero, and she's going to say a few words as well.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. So our ongoing efforts of CAB hopefully reflect for you the importance we continue to place on school safety and security. Our team continues to focus on prevention, which is equally, if not more important, than our focus on crisis planning. And we are proud of the emphasis we have put towards this and what we do have in place already, and our efforts to continuously reflect and revise when needed. As a district, we have school-based climate and safety teams at each of our 5 schools, which meet regularly and have members of CAB on it, as well as different school personnel, such as teachers, campus monitors, SROs, parents, and more. In addition, each school has a student assistance team, which is comprised of administrators, counselors, mental health professionals, SROs, teen talk counselors, who meet weekly to discuss the current events in the lives of our students and how to best support them. For instance, maybe if it's application time for seniors, which is pretty current. At each school, we continue to foster strong partnerships with students and families to ensure we are all working together to best support each and every one of our students at all ages. This includes our ongoing partnership with our police, who communicate all important safety-related information to our administrators and are readily available to attend school-based meetings to inform and educate our staff. At each school, there are daily walkthroughs of our school buildings and campuses by both campus security, SROs, supervisory aides, as well as administrators. And staff and students are continuously urged to recognize the importance of everyone's role when it comes to school safety. It is everyone's job to be observant and report concerns regarding student safety. And we continue to believe and encourage everyone, if they see something or hear something, to do something. As a CAB, we have many existing strategies and systems in place to help ensure the safety and security of our schools, and this slide is truly just a snapshot of some of these strategies and systems. As Steve had mentioned earlier, we have our crisis management plan book for our administration, which includes flowcharts for approximately 24 safety and security situations. A few members of us on CAB are currently in the process of reviewing and updating that this year. Each of our staff members receive a safety flip chart for them to use as a resource to reference and review all of our safety procedures. Each of our schools have campus monitors in place, which check in and screen visitors into our buildings. We use the School Gate Guardian software, which also integrates the sex offender registry and helps alert our campus monitors of any concerns. Each of our classrooms have office spaces, have crisis supplies in them in the event of a lockdown or a power outage or another unforeseen emergency. We also have emergency generators, AEDs, and lockdown buttons at each of our school buildings. Each of our classrooms have push-button locks, which allow every room to be locked immediately without needing the use of a key. Each school building has video surveillance cameras, which are monitored by campus monitors at their stations, and administration also has access to these cameras. And each school has supervisory aides, campus monitors, and SROs, which are an integral part of our school safety team. Both Jeff Deek, our high school SRO, and Shane Gibson, our elementary SRO, and Bob Muller, our district's lead campus monitor, are here tonight to help highlight their vital roles within our schools.
Thank you, Christy. Like Christy said, my name is Jeff Deek, and I am currently the SRO at the high school. I was over at Saks for many years, and Shane currently services all the elementary schools and backfills when I'm not here, or Matt Blank, who's the current SRO at Saks, who's on military deployment. When we're not here, Shane comes in, and he's got a lot of work to do, and he's constantly busy, so thank you, Shane, for that. I love the title of this slide that says Partners in School Safety, and that's exactly what we are as SROs. We are partners with central office, and we are partners with our administrators in our buildings, and we're constantly communicating with them to make sure that they understand the importance of safety. So what is our roles within the school and the district? We build relationships with the students and the families and the faculty, and how do we do this? We have open, honest conversations with them, and we spend a lot of time with them. And it's the only way we foster these incredible relationships is by spending that time with them. We're also the liaison between the school system and town organizations, like the Coalition for New Canaan Cares, where we talk about certain trends that are going on in different communities, so that we could bring that information back to New Canaan and better handle those situations. Like Christy said, we participate in the student assistant teams meetings. We develop youth-related programs, initiatives, like, for instance, at Saks Middle School, the monthly lunch that we have with specific students that are chosen by the counselors, and the New Canaan High School Police Club, which I host, which gives the kids an idea of what police officers do on a regular basis if they are interested in maybe a future in law enforcement. We deliver class presentations to students. We talk about the Bill of Rights. We talk to health classes and talk about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. And then with some of the other classes, like challenge classes, we take a deep dive into the Fourth Amendment, which is search and seizure, which they seem to love. We also we respond to crisis, and we sit on the Crisis Advisory Board. And lastly, we do a lot of training. We do training in the buildings, we do training with our safety teams, and we also, at a special thanks to Central Office for allowing us to do this, they allow our police department to train in the buildings so that in the event there is an emergency, most of our officers are familiar with the buildings. So these are just some of the things that we do as SROs in our buildings. Thank you.
You're up, Bob.
Thank you. Good afternoon, evening, actually. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a retired lieutenant with New Haven Police Department. I started my career here into 2014, right after the 2013 program initiated. I've always been at the high school. I am the 4th lead campus monitor. Since then, our role has grown tremendously. We just don't do the front door, back door anymore. We are really integrated with a number of tasks within the building and the exterior of the building now. When I took over, the first thing I did was I had a meeting with my campus monitors, and I let them know that they are expected to perform all functions and not what they just believe. When we sat down, one of the biggest things I found that they were a little comfortable, so I moved them around and I got them up, and actually everyone's required to do specific things through the day. There is no standard procedure anymore. I like to mix things up. So at the elementary schools, they would take breaks at a specific time and do their daily tour. I stopped that. I wanted to break that up and say, no, not anymore. You got to break that up. So I don't want any patterns or anything like that. Along with Officer Gibson, with his program, I have a one additional resource. I've been trying to assist each elementary school. When we did the assessments, I found out that each building is very unique in its challenges. So that one extra resource officer now, I try to make sure that they can break the campus monitor at the desk, so we don't take any of the interior staff away, like one of the secretaries or TAs, to do their job. So while one's actually walking the exterior, the other one's breaking them, and I think that's been working well. When I took over also, my position was at West, which didn't make sense to me, because I wanted to make sure if I had to go to a meeting, we weren't always changing that person out. I wanted to make sure West School had a dedicated person there, so I came to the high school. So this way, every elementary school is always covered. Sachs Middle School is always covered, because since, like I said, when I first came here, our roles have really expanded from the right to school program to activities after school. It's really challenging. I want to make sure we always have interior and exterior coverage. I have every campus monitor has all 3 officers' information. They have no, I tell them all the time, anything comes up, you don't have to contact me, you call them right away, and we want to make sure that we get the necessary resources we need to at that time. We also debrief with each other anytime there's an incident to make sure that we did what was needed, or is there any better way we could have handled something. We also then, once that's done, we also notify the administration of that specific school to make sure they're aware of it too. And that's pretty much it as of right now. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. In terms of our regular safety drills, each of our school practices a safety drill approximately once a month. Obviously, some months may have 2, just based on what the schedules are. But those drills are typically enhanced throughout the year. For example, if we are doing a fire and evacuation drill as we progress throughout the year, we may block a primary egress for a group of classrooms, and the students and staff will have to go back on some of their training to identify where that secondary egress is out of the building. So again, it's just to continue to practice various situations. CAB members and first responders do observe at least 1 full drill a year, in addition to our school-based safety teams debriefing, almost like an after action, to talk about the drills and to come together as a school-based team to make sure that we are doing everything correctly during our drills. Some additional drills that we do are enhanced lockdowns. Those are our drills. If you cannot evacuate in an emergency, what does that look like in your classroom? We have our modified lockdown if something is in the community and we need to secure our buildings and account for all of our staff and students. We have our rescue whistle drills, which typically take place on the playgrounds in our elementary schools in order to get students' attention and to move them to a safe area. We have our bus evacuation drills. These would most notably take place either before or after school if we need to evacuate our buses for whatever reason. if our buildings may not be open or are in a fire drill like we've had before. We have our weather-related drills, and we have our plainclothes intruder drills. And in terms of our plainclothes intruder drills, one of my first year at SACS, Officer Deek and I organized a plainclothes intruder drill. And after the plainclothes officer, could not get into our building, we actually had them walk in during recess, and we observed him. And as soon as he walked in the building, actually a fifth grader immediately told their teacher that person doesn't belong here. I don't see a badge on him. So it's just, again, these are conversations that we have starting in kindergarten. We want to make sure that students feel comfortable and are aware, we should all be wearing our badge. What do you do in an emergency? So, we accomplish that really through, all of our safety drills that we do. And again, as CAB, we continue to discuss and make sure that we're developing appropriate drills for not only our students, but our staff and faculty.
So as a CAB, we are committed to the ongoing education and training of all things safety, which starts with our Crisis Advisory Board and our administrators. All our administrators are CPR, AED, Heimlich, EpiPen, and Narcan trained. All administrators are required to receive their National Incident Management Systems 100 certification. As Steve mentioned, we regularly engage in tabletop scenarios at CAB and district administrator meetings, as well as attend workshops and seminars related to safety, prevention, and crisis preparedness. Continuing with our commitment to education and training, this slide helps highlight who and how we train. As you can see, we recognize the importance of training all members of our school community and in numerous ways. And it's, of course, important to highlight the training and education of our students regarding safety. As with everything we do, trainings and topics are dependent upon grade and age level of the students. This slide shows some of the many ways our students do learn about safety, so including learning about trusted adults, fire, electrical, internet, pedestrian, personal safety and recent trends, decision-making, safe driving, general safety assemblies, social emotional learning, and as Steve mentioned a little bit before about visitor protocols, our visitor protocols do include coaching students to recognize when an adult in the building is not wearing a badge and telling that trusted adult, as well as recognizing that all exterior doors should be kept closed and students shouldn't be opening the doors for anyone. And again, this is something that our students begin to learn in their earliest years with us and continue all the way through.
And just in closing is in terms of, the overview that we've given you tonight, hopefully it's clear that, we recognize all of our work is ongoing, and hopefully you see that, we've never been complacent when it comes to student safety, that we continue to work together to make sure we are providing the safest environment for all of our students. And also, we want to make sure that we equip staff and students with the appropriate information to help themselves in any emergency situation. We have always heard, see something, say something, but we want all of our staff and students to feel empowered if they do see something, say something, but also do something. That third piece is what I think we value most, because information is key, but, in so many of these crisis situations, people who do act are, typically lead to a better, an outcome for all those people involved. So hopefully that was very clear tonight in terms of our presentation, and at this time I believe we have some Q&A.
Yes, thank you for all of you to presenting. Questions? Penny?
Thank you for the great overview. I just had a question. I think that our focus that we do, the emphasis on prevention and establishing really strong relationships with our students and providing those students who need the extra support, that support is really key. And I was wondering, what do we do when students age out from the school district? Because I didn't notice that anybody from New Canaan Human Services was on CAB. And is that a gap, or is that covered in some other way by the town? Is that something we should be concerned about?
That's a good question. It's one of those things that, in terms of, as I reflect back on, my work, whether I was here at the high school, because I was a little bit more relevant in terms of when kids ate out, we would often work with Meg Domino, New Canaan Cares. But in terms of having them a part of CAB, that's a good suggestion. So I do appreciate that. And like I said, when I was at the high school, and now I think, I forget the name of the girl that now, we do reach out to them, especially if there are resources available beyond what we can offer them. So, for example, if we have a family in crisis, we do have a kids crisis, teen talk counselor. We do reach out to New Canaan Foundation if there are resources that we can give the family that we're made aware of through our SSPs. So that is a partnership that we do reach out to and a resource that we do draw on. But in terms of bringing them into CAB, that's something that I think we should discuss.
Great. Phil?
So the vulnerability assessments, how often are we doing those?
So, per our state report, we have to do them at least every 3 years, but this year alone, we've already conducted more than one at each school.
Okay. Officer Deek or Gibson, can you guys walk me through a typical day as an SRO?
It's funny you say that because I don't think there is a typical day. When I first took this role at Sachs Middle School, I'm like, what am I going to be doing? Little did I realize. And I say this, you have the middle school, use for an example. You have middle school, you have 1,400 kids that are developing, their bodies are changing, they're going through a ton of stuff. Now you have 2,800 parents involved in that, and they're going through their own stuff. And now you've got 225 staff members, which, by the way, are going through their stuff. And so there is no typical day. It's very much like law enforcement on the road. There are days that you want to save the world, and every person you meet is wonderful, is Mr. Rogers. But then the days that maybe you're a little tired and don't want to really do much are the worst days of your career. And the schools is much like that. I think the saving grace for me working in the schools is dealing with the kids. That's been the best part of my last years in law enforcement, is working with these awesome kids. So I don't have a better answer for you other than it really depends on the day.
Yeah. And my last question, and this is maybe better suited to jail or someone else on the administrative level, but kids who have an adverse reaction to a drill, they freak out, whatever it is, what's sort of protocol to getting them kind of back to square one?
Sure. I'm sorry, we were playing like chicken with the microphone.
We do announce all of our drills ahead of time to students and staff.
Right.
So if students, certain students do have certain anxieties around drill, which could be incorporated in some of their individual plans that they have, so they are notified, or different systems are in place to help support them before, during, and after.
Mm-hmm. And just to expand on that just a little bit, in years past, we've had a few students who, as you're saying, had very strong reactions to drills. So we've even had cases where we notify parents in advance and they could come pick up the children, and then we would just sort of talk it through, but they wouldn't be there for the noise and the excitement of all of that. But generally our staff are very well aware of who those students are. So when they know in advance, they're able to talk with the student and work with them to prepare them for the drill. But when it's significant, we involve the parents as well.
And I think too, to that point, our SSPs that I mentioned before, I've often referred to them as our unsung heroes. And this is one of those scenarios where they would support the student and their family. But the first and foremost, our teachers would notice something, obviously, and then reach out for support. And we would utilize resources we have in terms of talking through and making sure that they're comfortable going back into class.
And oftentimes, some of those students reach out to us because they want to know what's our role in those crises times. And sometimes we're wrapped in with our counselors to kind of walk these kids down or bring them down from the ledge to let them know that they are safe and they are cared for.
I don't know if you can answer this, but the crisis supplies in all schools and classrooms, what does that consist of? If you can't answer it, that's fine too.
No, sorry.
So there are resources available in case students are in the room for an extended period of time, such as maybe like a bucket that might be necessary and tarps for privacy.
Wipes.
wipes, some,
Not what I was expecting, but
okay.
And also, have you noticed, before, Officer Deek, before you were in SACS, and I don't know who can best answer this, but have you noticed a decrease in bullying with your presence?
You know, I think the term bullying is an overused term. So I can't really answer to that because I'm not involved too much with that, only on extreme cases really, because like I said before, that term to me has been overused, you know, whether it's on the playground because you lost in Foursquare or something else. But, you know, I could say that at least at SACS, the number of bullying cases were very minimal.
I think one thing to point out in terms of, you know, what Jeff, you know, has established and did establish at SACS is he's an ally to so many kids, you know, where I know it doesn't specifically answer your question, but I can tell you firsthand, just seeing how many kids would knock on his door just to say hello, or even when Officer Deek would come to recess, the amount of kids that would want to throw the football with. I think it just comes back to being an ally and having those positive relationships with kids. I know that's what we all strive for as well. And in my experience with Jeff, you know, that's something he definitely accomplished each and every day. And to answer your question, daily, he was with kids. You know, that's the bulk of his work.
Dan?
So how has, like, what are the early returns and maybe some of the challenges with the new kind of roaming SRO at the elementary level? Like how it's just started, correct? Right? Like how's it working? How's it been kind of getting integrated with the administrators, and, you know, have there been any kind of feedback from the kids?
So far throughout, since this program started, it's been fantastic. Every administrator with all the elementary schools have been great. Introducing me to the faculty, the students, pretty much giving me like a green light. Hey, go ahead, go do this. Hey, can you go to recess? We're having some issues with some kids doing this or that. And then just building those relationships within the schools. It's, as Jeff said earlier, like bouncing between all three schools. There's a lot. And then backfilling for these guys as well. So, but so far it's been fantastic. I've truly enjoyed being a part of the schools, being a part of just the community with that, and starting to build those relationships at a young age, so we can continue up through the as they go through the middle school and high school. So also getting to know parents during drop-off, pickup, open house, it's huge. So far, I think it's been fantastic, and I'm always open to feedback and criticism from the school staff as well. So.
Great, thank you. I have a question on, do we, as appropriate, involve or include bus drivers in our training for evacuation, or just other scenarios where that may be appropriate?
You mean evacuation of the school buildings, or?
Just, you know, in a scenario where busing might be necessary, or transportation, whether it's white vans or school buses. I'm just wondering if we involve them, or there's touch points with them, you know, in a crisis, what do they do? What is their role?
Yes. I don't know.
So
You know, yeah.
Roy's here tonight.
Right.
Roy sits
Oh,
on
there's
the
Roy.
Crisis Advisory Board as well.
Okay.
So he's part of the conversations and meets regularly with the drivers over in the bus building, and once or more a month, he'll pull all the drivers together for different training and things that are a variety of different things. So
Okay.
again, the cab is meant to be all-inclusive, so yes, transportation is very much part of it.
Okay. That was
Many of
my-
our white, the drivers of the white vans typically are stationed in our buildings throughout the day. So I know at SACS, they are active participants in all of our safety drills. I think about, you know, cafeteria drill, you know, they're involved in some way in either securing the area or helping bring kids to a safe area.
Great, thank you. Great, thank you for being with us tonight. Appreciate it. Yes, sure. And before you all leave, I'll just mention, we will be in executive session after the next presentation, so members of CAB who wish to join us, please do. Thank you. Okay. So next, we have an overview of our school climate survey results with Dr. Susan Bliss, who is our school climate coordinator. Welcome.
To come down for me. Thank you so much for inviting me to give you an overview of our school climate survey, and it's always a pleasure. And I really want to start by saying school climate is about relationships, and I really have the privilege to work with amazing colleagues, teachers, social workers, counselors, psychologists, administrators, and I wish I had time tonight to tell you all the stories about them playing basketball in the gym late at night, calling me at 6 p.m. on a Friday, dealing with a student crisis, texting me on Saturdays with excitement because they got a kid into soccer who was isolated and alone, and I could go on and on. But we have amazing people who are behind this data, and I just want you to know how wonderful it is to work with all of them. Obviously, we work very hard every day to make sure all of our students are engaged, that they are connected, that they're safe and valued in our schools. And we know that we have to create these learning environments for them to do their best work, and that's what this school climate is all about. So I'll start. I'm going to try to run through this quickly. I know it's late, so this will be the highlight version. If I start speaking too fast, you can slow me down. But what is school climate? It's really about those norms, values, and expectations that support people in feeling socially, emotionally, and physically safe. And it really does set the tone for everything that we do. We know that climate and culture are really the backbone of learning. And so we know that it also predicts outcomes in terms of kids' healthy development. We know it predicts better academic achievement, fewer risky behaviors, better physical and mental health, less bullying, better attendance, less aggression, and so on. And this isn't just in schools, right? We know Fortune 500 companies spend a lot of time on culture and climate, and that they have much better performance when there is a positive climate. So I think this is so important that we know motivation and performance happen when we have a positive climate. So when we care about things and we have a continuous improvement process, we start with measurement. And so it's really important that we do measure what we are interested in improving. For this past school year, we chose the Comprehensive School Climate Inventory as our tool to measure school climate. And I mentioned to you last time I was here about this inventory, so just very quickly, it is developed out of the National School Climate Center. It's been used in 2,000 schools. All the data is private. It's aggregated. There's no individual student data that's kept. It has very high reliability and validity. And we are mandated by the state of Connecticut to actually give the a school climate inventory of some sort every 2 years. Now, we did not give it in April of 2020. You might guess why. That's when we were adapting to a global pandemic. So we actually don't have data for 2 years ago. Our data that I will mention, a couple things that we were able to compare, is from 2018. So this is the first time that we have data in 4 years. Just as the overview, it is a climate survey that focuses on students, schools, school personnel, and families. And it's really just a profile that helps us look at our strengths, look at our areas of focus, and help us to think about how these different populations perceive school climate. Who participated? We had students grade 3 through 12, and I should mention that there are 2 separate school climate surveys, one for the elementary kids and one for the high school kids. They're worded differently. They're very careful about the kinds of language they use with the younger kids. Faculty, and you see the dates there when we gave the school climate survey, and for families, we made this survey available to them prior to the time that we administered it, so they were able to review the survey and decide whether or not they wanted their students to be involved. We've had excellent response rates across the board, so I thank all of the parents out there and PTCs and PFAs and all the work we did to get the word out. Although the family percentages don't look high, the company said we were like the superstars of family engagement. They usually get about 15% of their families responding, so I'm very proud of that. We did a super job in terms of family response rates. You do notice probably one other low number there. That was our high school students. This inventory was given in April of last year. Anyone have a guess about what was happening on that day? Yes, I found out in a panicked call to Bill Egan, where is the data? It's senior skip day.
Not that we condone it.
Not that we, right, but they didn't tell us that. They didn't tell. So lesson learned on that one. Otherwise, our response rates are excellent. We have 12 school climate. We have 12 school climate dimensions, and these are the areas that are measured as a part of the inventory. And I'm going to actually run through each of them with you because I think it's helpful to see the questions so that you get a sense about what it is we're actually measuring in each of these dimensions. So I'll try to go through that quickly. The first of the 12 is called social emotional security, and some of the items, I'm just going to read a couple, I won't read all of them, but you have some. These are just examples. I've been insulted, teased, harassed, or otherwise verbally abused more than once in my school. Very few students in my school make fun of other students. There are groups of students in my school who exclude others and make them feel bad for not being part of the group. Another dimension is support for learning, and example questions include my teachers encourage me to try out my own ideas. If I'm confused about something in class, I feel comfortable letting my teacher know. Teachers challenge me to do more than I think I can. We have social and civic learning. Examples include, in my school, adults teach me how to express emotions in proper ways. In my school, we learn ways to resolve disagreements so everyone can be satisfied with the outcome. And in my school, we talk about ways our actions will affect others. And by the way, the wording on all of these I took from the middle and the high school surveys. Respect for diversity. Students in my school respect each other's differences, and the differences were outlined as, like for elementary, it said whether you're a boy or a girl, things like that. This school welcomes and accepts people from diverse backgrounds. I like working with someone who's different than me. Adults in my school respect differences in students. Another dimension is social support, and this includes a pattern of supportive peer relationships. Students have friends at school they can turn to if they have questions about homework. Students have friends at school they trust and talk to when they have problems. And students generally work well with each other, even when they're not in the same group of friends. We have the same kind of question about adults. Teachers in my school have high expectations for student success. Adults in my school listen to what other students have to say. School connectedness. This actually has quite a few questions about family, but some of the questions include, I feel like I belong at my school. My school tries to let my family know about what's going on in school. I feel good about what I do in school. My parents and family members feel comfortable talking to my teachers. We also have a dimension on physical surroundings. My school building is clean. We have up-to-date computers and other electronic devices. My school looks good, for example, enough space, decorations, artwork, etc. Social media was another dimension. Many students in my school will try to stop other students from threatening or harassing others. Most students in my school do not share inappropriate information, including personal information, on social media. And most students in my school use social media in ways that support one another. There's another dimension called social inclusion. This really focuses on acceptance of students with disabilities. Every student of any ability level can be a leader in my school. Most people in my school feel responsible for including special education students in all areas of life, and my school provides opportunities for all students, including special education students, to help others. So that gives you a quick overview of the many dimensions. There is a 5-point Likert scale that is used so that when the students are filling this out, they can either strongly agree, neither agree or disagree or strongly disagree. Those are the options, so they're always giving you feedback on those statements that they were given. So a couple of things just about data interpretation. First of all, people always ask, are you able to compare to other schools? No, unfortunately, there are no community norms, and we're not able to compare to other districts in terms of our numbers. And that's typical for many of these school climate surveys. But what the company does give us is a frame of reference. And the references help us to really interpret the data that we have. The references are, if you get a score between 0 and 2.5, that's considered a negative score. If you have a score between 2.5 and 3.5, that's considered neutral, and 3.5 and above is considered positive. Two other things I'd like us just to keep in mind as we think about this data. One is that it's a snapshot in time, right? And it was a snapshot actually in a fairly difficult time. The tail end of a year, with a lot of COVID concerns in terms of kids, students, and so forth, and the tail end of a couple years of challenges that we had. So just remembering that, I think, is important. And the second thing is we're going to be looking at averages, a lot of averages, medians, but the real work of school climate is not in averages. It's in thinking about who are the students underneath these numbers, right? And asking the question, who are the students who are left out? Who are the students who aren't connected? So even when our numbers look good, we're constantly working to try to understand how we can do better and who those students are. So just keeping that in mind as we continue to look at the data. So the first slide here is our slide of all the elementary students. Remember, that's grades 3 and 4. And I put the sort of framework on the left-hand side again to remind us about negative, neutral, and positive. And you can see that overall, I think we have a lot to celebrate in terms of our scores with elementary school. I think 10 of the 12 of the dimensions were in the positive range. And we have a lot of strengths in terms of safety rules and norms. You can see support for learning, respect for diversity, physical surroundings. These were some of our relative strengths. We did have 2 areas that are in the neutral range. Those are a sense of social emotional security and also social media. So a couple of things on that. When I spoke with the company about this, they did tell me that nationwide, and it's nice having those 2,000 schools, this is what they're seeing in nearly every profile that they get, that social emotional security and social media are the low numbers for schools. So something to keep in mind. It doesn't mean we don't continue to understand this data and see how we can do better. One thing we did also find as we began to dig into the social media scores, there were a lot of neither agree nor disagree scores. And so what we think is a lot of students in the elementary level may not have phones, may not know what's going on other people's phones. They didn't know. But when they put a 3, that drags our mean down, right? So we have to be a little critical about that. And you'll see the same thing when I looked at families, when I looked at teachers. Again, a lot of neither agree nor disagree. So my sense is that this is not quite the major problem that you might see when you look at these bars. I also looked, and we had about 15% of our students who did say that they had some kind of negative experience in terms of somebody saying something mean to them through a phone or over the internet. So we do have something that we obviously need to address. But I just want you to know that when we dug in, there were some other issues in terms of the data as well. So we continue to work hard at our elementary level. One of the things we also found with the data in terms of our civic and social learning is that we had very high scores in terms of how we're teaching our kids emotional intelligence skills, which was great to see, and lower scores, which brought our means down around conflict resolution. That makes perfect sense because when we kind of moved to address a global pandemic, we stopped right at the point where we were about to roll out our conflict resolution tool, which you've heard a lot about, which is Blueprint. And we are just now kind of catching up and doing more with conflict resolution. So that's one of our goals going forward. We know that that's an important skill for kids for social emotional safety, right? Because what we see at the elementary level is many times, if they are mean, they don't have the skills to communicate, or they don't have the skills to kind of manage some of those emotions. So we think that's an important next step in our work. In terms of middle school and high school students, you can see again a lot of strengths here. We do have our overall score that's in the positive range, and many strengths in terms of safety, rules and norms. You see another strength in physical surroundings, our adult and relationships and support with students, which I have to say, given again that this all came at the end of some difficult times and a lot of following rules about state rules about social distancing, the fact that kids felt like they had really good connections made me just feel great to have that at this point. So a lot of good things. Again, we see neutral scores for social emotional security and social media. So We again are looking at, I think it was 70% of kids felt like they really did have great skills and learned a lot in terms of emotion regulation, but they're telling us about 40% said they were learning good skills about conflict resolution. So that's again something we want to focus on, particularly knowing that social emotional security is an area of growth for us. We're doing a ton. I'm looking forward to our new Start with Hello, which is going to be an initiative in the middle school where we're working on including all kids, and it's student-driven, so that's exciting. We've got a lot of great programming ahead this year to kind of work on that social emotional safety and kindness. We know that's going to be a big focus for us. In terms of family, again, we have very good scores. Our overall score was above that 3.5 and close to 4. A lot of strengths, again, in many areas, safety rules and norms, sense of physical security, support for learning, et cetera. As I mentioned, the social media is lower, and sense of social emotional security again. But social media, definitely the parents had a lot of I don't knows. I think it was 60% of parents said they neither agreed or disagreed to many of those items. And I think it was only 6% of the parents that said their children had had a difficult time, a negative experience with social media. So that was reassuring to see. Yeah. What's interesting too is how closely the student, staff, and parent scores mirror each other. So we continue to see strengths in similar areas. We can continue to see those sort of neutral areas in terms of social emotional security and social media. So very similar kinds of outcomes in terms of safety rules and norms. And physical surroundings was another strength, and of course that social support from adults. We love having our faculty and our staff being very involved in our school climate work. Christy mentioned that we have school climate committees at every building, and those are made up of teachers, mental health professionals, nurses, a parent. So we all work together in these committees to look at this data, and it's a really important part of our work. It's that continuous improvement process where we look at the data, we set goals, we set action steps, and then we evaluate at the end of the year how we did and continue to do that each year. We did have an opportunity to also look at stress levels. We thought that was important given what we've been through. So this was the overall stress levels of our staff in 2022. You can see that we had 3% reporting no stress, 16% limited stress, 51% moderate stress, and 33% high stress. My personal opinion is stress is an important part of life. You know, life is stressful, moderate stress is good. We need to learn how to deal with stress. It's part of who we are. It's the way our bodies prepare for a challenge, right? And so that's a good thing. We get more concerned when we see high stress over time and consistent, then it can begin to impact performance and impact well-being. So that's something that we'll continue to look at as a district. We have an amazing district wellness committee that works very hard to support our teachers. We did a lot of work with them over the past 2 years in terms of trying to offer stress reduction, mindfulness, yoga, all kinds of things to help. And I think more importantly, just listening to teachers about what is it that they need and understanding where the stress is coming from and addressing those underlying issues. And that is also part of our school climate committee work. We spend time trying to understand and really help the teachers. We also have some stress ratings from students, and for this we were able to compare from 2018 the data. I have to say I was pleasantly surprised that the data wasn't higher. We do see some increases of the stress levels of staff of SACS students, and you can see that in terms of limited stress is slightly lower, moderate stress is slightly higher, and high stress is slightly higher. But overall, I think that I'm impressed that we have supported our students so well during a difficult time that we aren't seeing huge increases in stress levels. We also asked about where the stress is coming from, because again, that's such an important part of addressing this. We don't just want to be throwing, breathe strategies all the time. We have to understand why kids are stressed and try to address those issues. And the top 3 for SAC students were testing, homework workload, and expectations of themselves, which I found really interesting. And I think it makes sense. Our kids want to do well. They work hard. That's important to them. We continue to look at homework and workload and testing. Some of our EI work is just simply taking 2 minutes before a presentation or a test to help kids to regulate before they go into that test and helping them to have those strategies. So this was some of the feedback we had from students at SACS. You can see the stress data for the high school here, very similar. It's kind of incredible, 2018 to 2022. Again, I really attribute this to our faculty, staff, and our support staff and how well they were able to help kids through a very difficult time. But that was great news. We do ask the students again about where the stress is coming from so we can try to address that. And you can see the top was expectations of myself for the high school students, testing, homework, and getting into college. Probably no big surprises there, but we have done a lot of work, and I really give Bill Egan and the rest of the team and the administrators there credit for doing surveys about homework, limitations on homework over weekends and holidays. Obviously, changing our start times is an important part of trying to change stress levels for our kids, putting in RAM time for kids. There's been so much that we have tried to do to address these particular issues, and I think it is helping because we aren't seeing the increases that we thought we might. So with that, I'm trying to keep it quick, so conclusions. You know, we did see a lot of strengths. Our real strengths were around physical surroundings, our norms and rules, which I found interesting, and I think that that goes along with all of the work that we've done to clarify for students' expectations and help them to learn how to go along with those expectations. Also around mean behavior, we've done a lot of work in the past few years around clarifying expectations and helping kids to understand, you know, how important it is to be kind and what the consequences are if you're not. And social support was one of our strengths, which again, I just think is wonderful that that was a strength even through such difficult times. We did score in the positive range for 10 of the 12 school climate dimensions, and our overall scores for staff, students, and families were all in the positive range. As I mentioned, the areas for growth were really that social emotional security and social media. I mentioned some of the things we're going to be working on to address those issues. With social media, I should mention it's Digital Citizenship Week this week, and so there's a lot happening. Mary Hannah, who does a lot of our K-8 programming, has some really robust and terrific lessons for the kids, and we continuously get student input on those lessons, and we'll continue to try to move because it moves fast. All of it changes every day, right? And what is social media to kids in middle school and high school? So we're working on that. And as I mentioned, we are seeing that some students are experiencing high levels of stress, particularly in the areas of testing, homework, and expectations of themselves. And some staff continue to experience those high levels of stress as well. So we'll continue to focus on that and how we can help our staff and our students to be their best and focus on the well-being. So those next steps, we will continue to work with those school climate committees that I mentioned. We really do drill down into the data and try to understand it in a more nuanced way than we're giving you sort of the big picture today, to disseminate that data to families. So I'll be doing presentations and working with PTC to share the individual building data with families. We wanted to come to you first, but that will be happening. We work with the teams to continually improve, as I mentioned, that digital citizenship, and we do have student input on that, which is terrific, as well as parent input. Any input, please. We're always interested and welcome that. We'll be sharing our results with community partners. We work closely with New Canaan Cares and others in the community to help us with programming for parents, and so that will be another part of our next steps. Obviously, continuing our emotional intelligence work and focusing on those issues of empathy, respect, positive communication, emotion regulation, and that resolving conflict is our big one. I was just at West the other day, and the amazing teachers are coming up with some terrific lessons around that, which is great to see. Those sentence stems, so you say, I feel, when you, and then would you please, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we all did that? It's a good one. We'll continue to work on the district wellness committee to support faculty and staff and continue to use the feedback, or we will use the feedback from our tri-state visit. And I don't know if you've heard about this yet, but we have a really amazing opportunity. Tri-State is an organization that brings together many districts throughout the tri-state areas to come and visit and really help districts to think about a question that they want some feedback on. And our question this year is going to be around well-being and how are we implementing and how are we making sure that our kids and our faculty really are feeling safe and feeling less stressed and feeling as comfortable as they can in our schools. So I'm excited to have that. That's going to be in March of 2023, and we have teams who will be pulling together data for them to look at our implementation of our EI work and of the many other things we do around well-being, and they'll help us to kind of think about how we're doing in terms of that implementation. So that'll be a great opportunity for us as well. So these are a number of the strategies we're using all the time. I won't go into each of them, but again, just to kind of outline that positive, trusting relationships really is the key, I think, to the school climate work. We've done so much in terms of the emotional intelligence skills. We know we have to do more, particularly with those middle school and high school students who it can be tricky to teach them, right? These skills, you get the eye roll a lot because they don't want to talk about feelings. And I'll tell you a quick story just because I had an adolescent, he's now 22, and he would give me the eye roll a lot because he had to deal with like a therapist-type mother, can you imagine, like constantly emotion regulation. But I got a call from him just last week. He's now almost graduating and applying for jobs, and he was in his 6th round interview with a finance company, and he said, they asked me about how I deal with risk, and I told them about all of my emotion regulation strategies. And I have to be honest, I know I'm the EI person, but I'm like, oh my God, you said what? That's probably not the answer they wanted to hear. So I also wanted to say to him, and I didn't say it, I can't believe you went to an interview without a haircut, you look terrible, but I didn't say that either. So the good news is, 2 days later I get a phone call, guess what? He got the job. So 3 takeaways. Number 1, kids learn emotion regulation skills even when we don't think they are and they're giving us the eye roll. Number 2, competitive organizations really see the intentional use of emotion regulation strategies as a strength, not a weakness. And number 3, nobody cares about my son's hair except me. So, with that one, I will just thank all of you for your incredible support. You know, I know you care deeply for our kids, and thank all of the faculty, staff, social workers, counselors, psychologists, administrators who do this amazing work every single day. It really is a pleasure to work in this exceptional district. And I'll end with the Maya Angelou, the very wise Maya Angelou quote, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that truly is the foundation of our emotional intelligence and our school climate work. And I will say that we will not rest until every single student who gets off a bus feels safe walking into our doors, and we will not rest until every single student has a place to work comfortably and to sit at lunch with somebody else. And we will not rest until every single student feels that we see their strengths and talents, because it's in that our students are not only ready to learn, but unstoppable. And I love the work, and I thank you all. And I will take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bliss. Appreciate it. Questions? I'm going to take your hair comment as advice for myself.
Oh, please, yes. When they're 22, don't say anything. Just
Okay. Any questions? Erica.
So I was wondering, you aggregated the middle and high school student data.
Yep.
You have that separated out, and I was
Yes.
available to the buildings. And I was wondering, on like social media, do you see differences with the scores in middle school and high school, or was it pretty consistent, and that's why grouping it made sense for the purposes of presenting to us?
Yeah, I mean, the company gives it to us this way for districts to look at it, so that was the way district data is given us. They put the elementaries together and then put middle and high school together, so I didn't do that. But the answer is there are differences between elementary, middle, and high school. There were not differences between the elementary schools. But definitely you started to see things change a little bit with development, right? That makes sense because they have more exposure.
Mm-hmm. And then at the building level, are you able to look at, you mentioned that this is all averages, but like, what percentage are ones on this subject? What does that mean? And is that the building level work that you're able to dive into? And have you started that yet, or is that something
Yeah.
that's coming?
That's absolutely the building level work that we have started. All of our school climate committees have met, I think all of them in September and early October. So they take a look at that data and start to disaggregate it as well and look at sort of where are the differences between students. And there are some meaningful differences that we have to start to look at. You know, which populations of students don't feel connected, which populations don't feel as socially and emotionally safe. And so those are the differences, and that will help us with our action plans and how we can move forward. Yeah.
And given that this is administered by a company, I'm assuming that the answer is no, but there's no tie between getting a number answer and having any sort of qualitative information that goes that explains it. That's something, the only way to get the qualitative is through getting, like you mentioned, student input and kind of reaching out on an anecdotal basis, but there's no sort of prompt to get deeper on some of what's behind some of those numbers in the survey.
It's a great question because I love qualitative data, and I think it's so important to help us to understand the quantitative. The quantitative is important, but it's not enough. We do focus groups in every school with students, and like, you know, at the high school, we'll bring in lunch, we bring in students, and usually, you know, I'll bring the data. We haven't had new data for a while, so this is going to be helpful. I was talking about 2018 data, that's, you know, but now I can say this is the new data. And then we ask the kids, you know, this is what it's saying about social media, tell us. This is what it's saying about social emotional safety. Who's not feeling safe? Help us to understand that. So it will be through that, those focus groups that we'll have more information, and happy to share that as we get it. And from parents too, I hope to do some focus groups with parents, and love your help in putting those together, because I think that'll be important to look at the parent and the family data and to get input from our parents and families as well.
And also, the ruler method is helpful in a lot of these areas. When it comes to social media, to what extent is the ruler method helpful in moving the needle, and what other, you know, resources or, you know, frameworks do we need to look at to be able to help it, you know, improve and continue to grow in that area?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I do believe that when kids start to get mean, you know, on the internet, some of that's emotion regulation, right? It's like, how do you deal with feelings and conflict in ways that isn't posting something? So there's a piece that's ruler, but there's a lot more decision-making. When we look at our SAPL, our social, academic, and personal learning framework, decision-making and problem-solving is a big part of that. So really digging into that decision-making, which is a part of our health curriculum. And then, as I mentioned, those digital citizenship lessons that we have in the elementary, middle school, and high school, and we are working at improving those at the high school and kind of adding more to it at this point. Just knowing what our kids are facing, that it's so much a part of their lives and how they communicate, and we have to continue to have those conversations. We've learned a lot about how to have them. It's sort of like, it's like the trend with drugs and alcohol, where you used to say, just say no. No, that doesn't work with kids. We know that. We have to engage them, we have to talk to them, we have to understand how they're using it and have them make better decisions about it. So that will all be happening. Yeah.
Julie? I think we're doing an awesome job teaching kindness and empathy and gratitude and mindfulness, and it's super important. Are we also teaching our students resilience, courage, strength? Sometimes I worry that we're doing such a great job with the kindness and empathy, but when they leave New Canaan, are they going to be resilient?
Right.
When they encounter people who haven't had the same education?
Well, in my opinion, the emotional intelligence skills are what builds resilience. That is resilience, right? If you have difficult situations, you have to have those skills to be able to face them. And so we are working at having our students be stronger and to be able to manage situations, right? That's the idea. I know that one of my son was telling me a story about one of his colleagues at his internship who was fired for getting into a fight with a colleague on the spot, same day, right? Emotion regulation skills are part of resilience. So I will say also, in addition, though, to the empathy and kindness and all of the EI work, we do a lot around courage, around character, around persistence, around growth mindset. So that's also all part of lessons. I know at West they were just coming up with a number of those that they're going to be teaching kids, and we do that across as well. But I think, we'll continue to see the places that we can integrate it.
Dan?
just curious for the district's staff stress, do you have a similar breakout by domain as you did for students to like what are the kind of major drivers?
Oh, that's a great question. Number one was expectations of myself. Workload was one, and parent expectations was one. I think those were the top three for the staff. But I thought it was interesting, right? Expectations of myself. We do have teachers who work exceptionally hard and care a lot about their jobs, and that was great to see. But those are the top three. I'd have to go back and look, and I can share it with you when I get it.
And then in next steps, you talked about disseminating the school climate data to families. Obviously, this presentation is going to be publicly available. Are you expecting either more data, some disaggregated data, and or just other communications to make people and parents kind of aware of this for those that aren't tuning into this meeting?
Yes, for sure. Because we do have the building level data. So when I go to do the presentations, I'll be doing that presentation, not district. So at West, we'll do West, and ESA, they'll have a lot more data than I, kind of gave you the big overview today, for sure. And, we'll think about some other ways we can also communicate that information to parents.
And then I guess last question is, you were saying we do this every other year is the expectation?
That's the expectation, right.
Would you use this framework again? Like, do you feel like this level of questions and the data you get back is sufficient to help kind of guide areas for improvement and areas where we're strong, or are there are there different services that you might consider?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. We did go through a very comprehensive review to decide on this particular inventory, and I am happy with it. And I think each one has its strengths and weaknesses, but I think for me it's going to be very important to use it again so that we can look at some longitudinal data. That'll be really helpful. So I wouldn't want to shift. Is it perfect? No, but I think it's got really good reliability and validity, and it helps us really look at the things we need to look at in terms of action plans.
And then I guess just given 2022 was also a somewhat kind of disrupted year, would it make sense to do one again in like 1 year as opposed to waiting 2? Or is that something to discuss?
It's a great question. It's certainly something we could think about. It does cost money, and it's something we have to kind of think through. But I hear what you're saying. It's been a crazy time, and sort of this dipstick in at the end of this year. You kind of wonder what is it going to look like in a year, and so maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering similarly, because we have in our goals both a social and emotional piece, and we also have other goals around that type of work, do we need more touch points on this? And, with other assessments, we don't rely on just what the state requires. We say we need to do more, we need to keep up on it. So that's something that I think is worth considering.
And maybe it's a deeper dive in some of the areas that we've identified, as opportunities. The one comment I was going to make on the social media, because that's such a big bucket, and you probably know a lot more about it. But when we think about social media, I think my first instinct is to think about Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, the things that the kids use, particularly Snapchat probably, but also texting. And I know that there's so much communication that happens, not only amongst the children and the kids themselves, but with families. And it's such a big way to communicate even among families, and that's been such a shift that perhaps there's an opportunity to bring parents into, think about how we have that conversation as a community and help educate parents around using text and messaging as a primary form of communication, because I think for many of us it becomes that by default, just because everyone's busy and on the go, and there's a lot that I think can be learned for all of us in that. So.
No, I think that's a great point. And I have been in touch with New Canaan Cares about that. This is, an area that we want to do more for parents and families. And we know it's important. And there have been just, huge seismic shifts in our culture because of the technology. Much of it good, but some things that we have to consider the impact. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Oh, Bob. Yeah, sorry.
This is probably more for Jill, but thanks. Two of the, the higher stress points for students in general was homework and testing. I'm assuming they don't mean like standardized testing. They're probably meaning like in classroom stuff, right?
I would assume that it's more the classroom. It could be midterm exams, final exams that causes a lot of anxiety for children, a lot of stress for students. And we have been working at trying to balance that all out, the homework and the midterms and the finals at the high school. And then we also are very careful about that at the middle school as well. But the kids do get nervous when they sit and they take those benchmark assessments. They know that it goes into Power School, which I think is actually more of a stressor than the Smarter Balance, because Smarter Balance doesn't go into Power School.
Right, right, right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and our final topic is Statement of Accounts with Sean. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Although it's extremely early in the year, I'm going to take you through where we are as of September of '22 and make some comparisons to our budget and year to year. Through September of this year, on a budget of $99.1 million, we've spent $14.7 million, or 14.8% of the budget. That compares to basically where we were last year is about 14.8%. So pretty much on track as far as that is concerned. Encumbrances are currently at 72.9, or 73% of budget. Compares to $63 million, or 68.4% of budget last year. The difference there between the 74% and the 63%, primarily driven by transportation, which was not fully encumbered at this point last year. So it's really just a timing difference. As far as our ending balance goes through September of this year, we're at 11.5 million, or 11.6%, and that's predominantly driven by things that we don't normally encumber, such as overtime, substitutes, utilities, things like that. So bottom line net message is very early in the year, but it looks like we're pretty much on track. I did want to, if you turn to the second page in the package, I just wanted to introduce a new chart. This is an attainment of budget chart. On the left-hand side of the chart is where we were, the first column, expended as of September 30, 2021. We're at $13.6 million. Relative to where we ended the year in full year 22 of 91.9, we spent through September of last year 14.81%. And then if you look at the next set of columns in the second box, where we are as of September of this year, 14.7 million on a budget of 99.1, or 14.8%. So you can see on an attainment basis, we're pretty stable. And then over in the last box is the attainment year to year. A positive number would be goodness, meaning that we're projecting to have potential savings opportunity. A negative would imply that we have potential risk. But if you look bottom line, we're at 0.00%, and right below that is essentially a very small amount of savings opportunity. And as I said from the outset, still very early in the year. I intend to include this chart. It'll get more interesting as we progress throughout the year. So I'll take any questions.
Questions? I like this new chart. I think it's a good addition.
This
helpful.
We use this in corporate. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
And it's especially good for budgets that are on an annual budget. We don't have quarterly budgets. We don't have monthly budgets. And it's cyclical. Expenses, in this is very cyclical. So if you look at it on a year-to-year basis or an attainment basis, it can point out where we have potential risks and savings opportunities, and then make appropriate adjustments.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
All right. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll move on. Oh, we have one. Oh.
Always the wrong time. Didn't expect a big crowd. Okay, 2 minutes, I promise. Hannah Chen from Springwater Lane. I just have some comments. New school year, so parents just curious what happened in the school. One of my friends said the kids in their school, which is a district in north of us, in the first week, kids has been asked by multiple times, multiple teachers, question like, what's your pronouns? Do you feel you're a girl or boy today? I mean, multiple times, multiple teachers, in general, not for specific students with certain needs. I don't think this is a protection. This is a promotion. Also, if school or teachers find any indication students need some special or extra attention or help, shouldn't parents be first contact, check with, and work together at the first place? I told my friend, thank God we're in New Canaan, a place we're still holding common sense, which may not be common anymore in some other places. Sure, young people have all the rights to explore, to adventure, to find out who they are, what to do. They can't afford because they're young. But as an experienced adult, especially parents, we all know not all errors are worth trying. Not all the mistakes can be fixed. And not all the procedure or process can be reversed. Young people, especially students K-12, they need a guidance. They need protection. They need to know what's the boundary. Life is a one-way journey, and life is precious. Not every experiment is proper. And of course, everyone can share their personal choice, preferences, but advocating or promoting, especially school or teacher and staff, I don't think so.
2 minutes.
Okay. Because at the end, it's the student and the family who are going to take the consequence, if any, for the rest of their life. Dr. Lazzi, if your resume, your performance, or our school district is affected by not doing this, you have all my support, and you earn my respect. Because following the crowd, usually it's easy and convenient, and following one's heart sometimes is not. You require vision, courage, and maybe money. All right, I don't have time. So after all, I hope this kind of promotion is not happening and will not happen in New Canaan. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Announcements and future business. Dr. Lutzy.
Yes, very quickly, we have a couple of meetings coming up next week. On Monday, a week from tonight, we'll have a Board of Education workshop where we will preliminarily begin our budget work, talking about insurance and taking a look at our internal services fund. Joe will be joining us to run through a couple of different scenarios, and as the board's aware, we've extended invitations out to the other town bodies to hopefully join us in that workshop, so we can all be a part of the conversation there and learn from each other. On the 27th, we have another Board of Education workshop, so I apologize to do 2 in a week, but that is to help to move forward the goal around vision of the graduate. We will be meeting with somebody to talk about a process that they've been putting together for us to do that work and to get that started. And if the board agrees, we'll be able to kick that off very soon. At our next Board of Education meeting, a couple of weeks from now, a regular meeting, we anticipate having our enrollment report to come before the board with our staff utilization. We're just starting to get the drafts of those in, so we'll take a look at all of those. And we will be likely giving a brief update on the tri-state visit that's coming to share a little bit more information about that with the board, as you heard tonight, a little bit briefly mentioned. And there you go.
Thank you. Okay, now I'll ask for a motion to adjourn to executive session for the purposes of discussing school security, and members of the Crisis Advisory Board and Police Chief Korlakowski are invited to join the board in executive session for this discussion. First, Erica, second. Dan, all in favor? All right, so